So the deadline for putting in a talk was coming up, and I was actually kind of stressing about it. I wasn't coming up with any good ideas, and work had been super busy. And I get home, and my youngest daughter is like, let's go look for bugs in the yard. And it was hot, and I was tired, and work had been stressful, and I really wasn't feeling it. But we went out there, and you know, how do you say no to that cute face? So I go out, and while we're out there, I was like, you know, Daddy hunts bugs all day at work. She's like, really? I was like, well, computer bugs. And apparently I'm not very good at finding real bugs, because we didn't find any bugs that day, which might have been because it was like 100 degrees outside, right? But we're all bug hunters, right? We just do it in comfy chairs and with air conditioning and not in the Kansas heat or the Kansas humidity. But one of the things, when we're going on a bug hunt, you've got to get the proper equipment, right? So we need to dress for the part, and we need to get our net and get ready to go on a bug hunt. So as a developer, what's one of the first things you reach for equipment when you're debugging? The print statement, right? Everybody does that. Everybody here? We've all used the print statement. You shouldn't use the print statement. And you may be thinking it's a trick question. Maybe you should be using this print statement, right? Because we should all be using Python 3, right? You shouldn't use that print statement either. There's better tools. Depending on what kind of bug you're hunting, if we're looking for common bugs, regular bugs, we can use something a little easier that helps in more general ways specifically for Django, django-debug-toolbar. Who here uses django-debug-toolbar? Okay, good. Most everybody, but some people haven't. I'm always surprised the people who have never heard of it and never looked at it and think it's hard to use or that it's something difficult. So we're going to take a quick look at django-debug-toolbar. So I've got a silly little app that I'm working on, and if you look over here, there's this little highlighted thing, and if I click this, it shows me all sorts of interesting information about my site. It shows me, it shows me which versions of things are installed, how long different things took to, right? How much time do I spend in the request, DOM content, shows settings, all the different things. If I'm confused, I don't need to go look at my settings file. What settings are being used right now? What type of headers? And then the request itself. All my cookies, everything I'd want to know about your average Django request. And this is one that I think people don't use enough, which shows all the SQL queries. This is where your app gets slow. Right? We can see the whole statement and then exactly where it was generated. We can see a query plan from Postgres, see if we're missing an index. If something's not showing up in your template, you can print out statements and see that it's set in the context, or you can just click into here and see exactly what is in your template context. You can also see the signals that are fired, any times you called cache, any logging statements you used. I apologize if my voice is a little hoarse. I'm a little bit under the weather. But sometimes there's harder bugs. Bugs that you just can't fix with debug toolbar. Scary bugs. So maybe you need to reach for something like PDB, the Python debugger. Who here uses the Python debugger? I'm surprised it's almost the same number of people. I never ever use debuggers. I don't know why, it's just never been my thing. I'm never confused about the program's flow. I'm always just confused about, I'm just wrong about what data is set where I think it's set. right? I think I've got a list, it's actually a tuple. I think I've got a dictionary filled with data, and it's actually a none, right? Like those are my confusions. Those are where my bugs come from. They don't come from, I don't understand why this if isn't firing. It's not firing because the data's not set, right? So you can, PDB, if you're not familiar with Python debuggers, you can run your program through, and if you set trace at any particular spot, your program will stop, and then you can slowly iterate through. Go to the next line, go to the next function, show me the value of this variable here. And you step through your program line by line. Like I said, I don't particularly find that useful, but maybe you will. This is really helpful if you have a very, very complicated program and you're very confused as to why you end up over here when you think you should be over here. But in my experience, if your program's that complicated, you should probably work on just simplifying your program rather than getting into more advanced debugging. So yeah, not a huge fan. I am, however, a huge fan of this. You can embed a Python shell, an IPython shell, anywhere you want. It's, in my opinion, basically the same thing as using a debugger. So let me show you a quick example. So this is the view for this dashboard page we're looking at. And if I do this, so from IPython, import embed, and then call embed. I use it so much I have a hotkey for it in Sublime. So if I go back here and I refresh the page, you'll see it's just spinning. It's just waiting. But if I go back over to my run server, it's now dropped me into an IPython shell right in that, so I can say self request user. Right? I'm right in there. What's in the context? I can add stuff to the context. And then when I exit, it continues on normally. And we go and we've refreshed the page now. And if I look in here, in my context, we've added foobar there into the context. So I'm really just plugged right in at that line. But I can navigate with IPython, which is something I use all the time, and not stepping through with the debugger and having to remember all those commands. And of course, it jumped me back. But I think the real secret to an effective bug hunt is to use logging. There's really two kinds of bugs. There's the bugs that I've just generated locally in my local development. And then there's the bugs that happen after we've deployed to staging or production, right? Logging gives me the information for both. Right? If I've got good logging and I'm logging locally, I get my answers about what my data is set to. And then when I go to production, I have that same data, right? So I'm killing two birds with one stone. Two bugs with one stone. So obviously, you can just use the standard Python logging library, and it's really hard to use. This is an example of using Python logging. You just set up, this streams it to standard out. If you're using containers in a good 12-factor app, this is really all you need to do for a script. You can set different levels, so you can turn off. So right now, we're logging the debug level. So we see everything from the debug level and above. And so we would see both testing and debug in our logs when we ran this. If we set that to just info, we would only see the testing. So we can turn off the really verbose data that we don't want to see. There's a slightly better version that Armin Renasher did called Logbook. It's quite a bit faster. So if you really get into logging and you do a lot of logging and you're worried about eking out that last little bit of performance to your app, having a whole lot of logging statements is actually fairly slow. The Logbook is quite a bit faster. I think it's about twice as fast. And it's just about as easy to use. Here we just set up slightly differently. And again, this will just log to standard out. We'll log, here's some info. Finding bugs is fun. There's also a Python library called structlog. Its example does not fit well on a slide. It's much more verbose. But what it allows you to do is as you're going through your code, you can say, bind this variable here to this name in my structured log. And then when I get to a point where I want to emit a log, I just say emit this log. And all the variables that I have bound, their values end up in the structured log. And you can decide to output them as JSON or as CSV or however you want to use them downstream. So, as I mentioned, my daughter doesn't think I'm very good at bug hunting. Because when we went out there, I kept turning over rocks, and we weren't finding any bugs. So one of the techniques for finding where is your bug is to divide and conquer. First, I lift up this rock. Nope, no bug. I go over here and lift up this bug, or this rock, no bug. So it's got to be here. It's got to be under this middle bug, or this middle rock. And so I can dig in there. Once I've verified it's not over here, and it's not over here, it must be somewhere in here, I can dig in and get into the meat of things. Another thing that I've found people don't do is they keep attacking the problem from the kind of the same state. And often if you start with a clean slate, fresh data, clear out your database, get rid of all your testing data, recreate whatever you need. Right? Fresh perspective. Go grab lunch, go walk, go grab a coffee. When I used to be a smoker, I can't tell you how many times I'd be so frustrated with a bug, and I'd get up to go outside for a smoke, and I wouldn't even make it outside before I go, oh, that's where my problem is. Just getting your mind out of the problem. And then a fresh set of eyes. Some people have talked about this. It's called rubber ducky debugging. Just say it out loud. Get your friend to come over, take a look at it with you. Sometimes just explaining the problem to them will help you find it. And then if you've got this complicated mess, whatever you do, only change one thing at a time. Because you're never going to be able to figure out where this is coming from, where your problems lie, if you're pulling out 4 wires at a time. Anybody have any questions? Happy to. Oh. Thanks.
We actually might want to get you to put the hat back on and grab the net for an official
Oh,
photo.
Sure, that sounds like a good plan.
But yeah, we actually do have plenty of time for questions, so please don't be shy. Just for recording purposes, do come up to the mics on either side, and let's chat.
Hey, how you doing? You just basically described the story of my life.
I think that's all of ours, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
this is all I do.
Yeah.
This is all I do is find this stuff. And I guess I could make a lot of comments, but I'm not going to do that. I'll ask a question. After you've done all this stuff, I would love to see you talk about the role of regular expressions and funny things like that, right? To find all the instances
of this particular bug, yeah. Well, I mean, that's really more of a problem of being dry, of not repeating yourself. Like, you should really only have a bug in that same bug in one spot, right? Like, if you're having to find it copied in many, many places, that's probably just bad design, right? But yeah, using regular expressions to find common patterns happens. I do a lot of refactoring for people, and so I'll see that they're using something, a bad pattern, and it's more of a maintenance nightmare than really a bug. It does what it needs to do, it's just, verbose or slower or something like that, and so I'll have to search through a code base. There's a really great tool called ACK, A-C-K, it's basically grep for programmers. So you can say search all, you can say ACK -- Python search and then a search string, and it will search from the current directory down only Python files for that string, or you can say ack -- CSS, and it'll only look for CSS, but also is smart and looks for Sass and less and those kinds of things. So that saves me so much time, and it gives you some context lines around each match, so you can kind of see where in the code. Here, I'll show you an example. So you can see it picked up a bunch of HTML docs and stuff where I mentioned it, right? And so if I just do ack -- Python, it'll only find it in the Python files.
Yeah, that's good to know, because some of us, we go into strange code bases, large, strange code bases. So rewriting it is not an option. You know, refactoring it is not an option. You know, but fixing bugs is a requirement.
Yeah, yeah. No, another one, I use Sublime Text, and it's got a really great search replace feature, so that you can step through and be like, I should replace this, I shouldn't replace that, I should be replacing this one, and it kind of walks you through, and you can do multiple files with the same. So that might be something to use.
Hi, great talk. Quick question. So you mentioned PDB and how you're not too fond of it, and then you mentioned IPython and how you love it. What are your thoughts on IPDB, which is PDB with an IPython shell?
So the thing that never clicked for me until recently is that so IPDB is better. Like, it's got the better tab completion type interface and everything, and the history. The thing that never clicked for me was that with PDB, you can issue the interact command, and then it basically gives you an IPython shell at that point. But for me, that was the first thing I was always typing, right? And so I just switched over to going straight to the shell because I didn't need to step through anything. I don't know. I'm very rarely confused as to why I'm in this function or why, how this flowed. I just need to see the data here and then maybe over here, but I don't typically need to do that in one session.
Got it. So it was more of a habit thing. I think.
Yeah, it could be.
I think you'll like the new IPDB with IPython 5, though.
I'll check it out.
Hi, this is a little bit more of a vaguer, open-ended question, but I find that as you become more experienced programming, you sort of develop your own way of debugging, and you get better at debugging, basically. But when working with a novice programmer or someone who's learning, a lot of times they sort of tend to shoot in the dark because they haven't really learned how to properly debug yet. And I always say the first step is look at the error message, right? But do you have any experience or just comments on when you're working with someone who's new to programming, how to sort of guide them through the debugging process?
So it depends on the bug. If it's really like if I walk up and I see the error and I know exactly what they've done, right? That's different than if I have to dig a little bit. If I'm digging a little bit, I very much tell them exactly why I'm doing the thing I'm doing. Right? I'm going to look over here because I think the problem is in the template, and it's just that you're using the wrong template variable name, and it's not that the data's wrong, it's just you're using it wrong here. And, oh, no, I'm wrong. Look, you've used it right, so it's that the data's not getting set. So we now need to go to the view and look and see how the data's being set, right? And instead of just going, oh, it's right here, because I might jump through 3 or 4 files real quick and confuse them, right? Yeah, I don't know. Debugging is hard, right? Like it is something you get better at as you get. Hopefully, also you get better at not bugging and not putting them in the first place. But but debugging is what we do. This is why we, the one thing I do when I teach training classes is I tell people, I was like, just last week I spent 2 hours going, what the fuck? Why is this not working? And, it ended up being something very small that I just overlooked 3 or 4 times, right? And so to give them that encouragement that it still happens to me, it still happens to people better than me, right? Like, you're never going to get rid of this. It's always just a matter of working through each one. But you mentioned regular expressions in the last one, and I just realized that for me, the hardest thing in the world to debug is a problem with the regular expressions in urls.py. And I'm really good with regular expressions. I came from the Perl world, and so like I've read Mastering Regular Expressions 5 or 6 times. I'm really good with regular expressions, but for whatever reason, that is the hardest thing. I don't see the problem in the URLs.
All right, we have, I think we have enough time to get these two and that one, so we'll let you go ahead since you were next.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you had any specific tools that you know of or strategies as far as like debugging microservices, if you have like a Python microservices architecture, if you're familiar with like, because I think like PDB and those sorts of tools work really well if you have something monolithic, but like if you're trying to trace something across a bunch of different, even if they're all Django REST framework APIs.
You've got to use logging, right? And you need to log them into one central thing so that you can look at them. And then you can see, okay, I'm issuing this request and I got back this data, and then it went to this service and it issued this request and it asked for this data and it got this data back, and each one, and that's really the only way you can do it, right? Because otherwise, like you said, you're gonna have to put a set trace in here and step through stuff, and a set trace over here and step through stuff, and that doesn't work very well. Jane?
Yeah, Django toolbar is really great. But what if you're someone who's doing a single-page app and using something like React.js, and everything's in Ajax, and suddenly all I'm doing is using the browser's console to see what the network traffic is? Do you have something to recommend for folks in that situation?
So if you're using React and Redux, there's really good browser plugins for Redux that can show you the Redux dev tools. Is really great. But also one thing that people miss, and I'm going to have to look this up real quick because I don't remember in this project what one of my APIs are here. But if you okay. If you hit the Django REST framework endpoint, the debug toolbar still works. And so for example, if you want to see the queries or you want to see anything about, so if you hit the browser interface, that's supposed to be the human consumable part, if you have any questions about how that data is getting in there on the Django side, you can still use the debug toolbar. But entirely in the JavaScript world, you've got to rely on the JavaScript tools really to help you there.
Okay, cool, thank you.
I've got one quick question. As a big fan of Spectrum, and if there are people in this room who don't know Spectrum, check it out, twitter.com/devspectrum, if there are any new or cool features on the way.
So right now, so Spectrum is a product that we put out that makes logging useful for the developer. Right now, I'm just adding support for other languages. So like we've got a Chrome plugin, and so you can get console.log, and I'm slowly adding in Ruby and Go and JavaScript logging libraries for Spectrum. Okay, well, I think we're at time, so thanks a lot, everybody.